Greetings everyone, my name is Gigi and this is Let's Build, wherein I build a LEGO set timed to different media and talk about the facts concerning the topic of the build. Today's build is the LEGO Speed Champions 007 Aston Martin versus the video game GoldenEye for the Nintendo 64. The footage I'm using for this game is for science, educational, and research purposes. My content is transformative and protected under fair use. All footage is time-lapse with commentary. There will be spoilers for some James Bond films. You have been warned. Moving on to the specifications of the LEGO set. The LEGO Speed Champions 007 Aston Martin DB5 construction set gives kids aged 8 and up, car enthusiasts, and James Bond fans of all ages the chance to collect, build, and explore one of the world's best-known sports cars. Perfect for high-speed play and display, this faithful LEGO recreation captures the elegance and timeless sophistication of the iconic 1964 British sports car. An awesome addition to the Speed Champions collection. This collectible Aston Martin DB5 sports car model comes with molded silver-colored wire wheel rim inserts and 4 extra sets of license plates representing different James Bond movies, plus a No Time to Die James Bond figure. Celebrating engineering ingenuity. LEGO Speed Champions building sets deliver mini versions of the world's leading and most iconic vehicles. Popular with kids and adults, the high-quality models are great for display or for thrilling race action against other vehicles from the Speed Champions range. Discover the 007 Aston Martin DB5 LEGO Speed Champions toy replica of the world-famous 1964 sports car. What's in the box? Everything you need to build a LEGO interpretation of the 007 Aston Martin DB5, plus a No Time to Die James Bond minifigure with toy wrench. A collectible model for play and display. Build your very own Aston Martin DB5, show it off to friends, and enjoy fun race and car chase action against other vehicles from the Speed Champions range. A gift for any occasion. This 298-piece LEGO Speed Champions 007 Aston Martin DB5 model can be given as a birthday or any other day of the week. Gift for kids aged 8 and up, car enthusiasts, and James Bond fans. Dimensions. The 007 Aston Martin DB5 model measures in over 2 inches high, 6.5 inches long, and 2.5 inches wide. No batteries required. This collectible LEGO Speed Champions 007 Aston Martin DB5 is powered by your imagination. This next excerpt is taken from the LEGO Creator 007 Aston Martin DB5 set, since the original manual for this particular set goes right into the build without any fanfare. The most famous car in the world. Manufactured between 1963 to 1965, the DB5 with its 5-speed gearbox, 6-cylinder twin overhead camshaft, and 4.0-liter engine had a run of just 1,023 cars. Aston Martin handed over the DB5 prototype to the Bond production team for use in Goldfinger, where it was fitted with its famous extras. The car returned in the pre-title sequence for Thunderball, where it fired high-pressure water cannons. The Goldfinger DB5 had 3 different number plates, the most famous being BMT 216A. In GoldenEye, Bond drives a DB5 with the number plates BMT 214A, leading die-hard Bond fans to speculate that this must be Bond's personal vehicle. In Casino Royale, Bond wins a DB5 on Bahama plates in the game of poker. Eventually, the original BMT 216A made a return in Skyfall. After a 30-year absence, it reappeared in GoldenEye, complete with champagne cooler and fax machine, and then again in Tomorrow Never Dies, and then again in Tomorrow Never Dies. While in The World Is Not Enough, it is caught on satellite image and also features in deleted scenes. In Casino Royale, Bond wins a DB5 in a poker game, and in Skyfall drives one up to his ancestral home, where it is destroyed in a firefight. A restored version then appears in Spectre and stars in the film's final shot. A Star is Born. For Goldfinger, production designer Ken Adam and special effects man John Stears set about adding the now famous gadgets to the DB5 prototype. By mid-February 1964, after just 6 weeks of mechanical labor, they had fitted an arsenal of weapons that would propel the car to stardom. The Aston Martin DB5, which appears in Goldfinger, Thunderball, GoldenEye, Tomorrow Never Dies, Casino Royale, Skyfall, Spectre, and No Time to Die. On film. Arguably the most iconic car in the world, the Aston Martin DB5 debuts in the film series when 007 visits Q's laboratory in Goldfinger, where he is informed that his Bentley is to be replaced by a silver birch Aston Martin DB5 with the plate number BMT 216A, which it will wear for all its appearances except for 2. Q then introduces him to most, but not all, of the added extras. The filmmakers wanted the car to surprise people when its full array of armaments came into effect. The first gadget deployed is the tracking device, which Bond attaches to Goldfinger's Rolls-Royce Phantom 3. Using a control panel in the center console, 007 next engages the tire slashers to disable Tilly Masterson's Ford Mustang after she's taken a pot shot with her sniper's rifle. Later on, bidding to escape the Auric Enterprises, 007 employs the car's smokescreen and oil slick. The bulletproof rear shield, meanwhile, saves him when he's trapped in a crossfire. Once captured by Goldfinger's goons, Bond escapes by utilizing the ejector seat, and then unloads with the twin front-mounted Browning machine guns that emerge from behind the forward indicator lights. Also engages the extending front bumpers. In 1965's Thunderball, the car appears in the opening sequence. Here Bond makes a getaway from a Spectre chateau via jetpack, jumps into the DB5, and fires high-pressure water jets at his adversaries from the car's rear. The jets are used again when Count Lip gives pursuit and Fiona Volk intervenes on her BSA Lightning motorcycle. After a 30-year hiatus, the DB5 returns in 1995's GoldenEye. Bond turns a leisurely drive in the DB5 with Caroline, MI6 psychological assessor, into a road battle with Zena Onatop's Ferrari F355 GTS as they head to Monte Carlo. Bond is behind the wheel of the DB5 in 1997's Tomorrow Never Dies as he drives through the streets on his return to London. For The World Is Not Enough from 1999, The Aston Martin was part of a scene deleted from the final cut. However, the car's outline can be seen in the closing of the film, as Q uses a thermal imaging satellite to locate Bond from their Scottish HQ in Castlemaine. The car reemerges as a series regular from Casino Royale in 2006. Here Bond wins a left-hand drive 1964 DB5, complete with Bahamian number plate 56526, from Alex Demetrios in Poker Match at the Beach Club. In 2012's Skyfall, 007 recovers his classic DB5 with the number plate BMT 216A from his London lockup and drives up to his ancestral home with M, his finger on one point hovering over the ejector seat button. It's back in full throttle action during the final showdown in Scotland, where the front-mounted machine guns are used to lethal effect. The DB5 is shot to pieces by Silva's helicopter, but is recovered and restored in Q's lab in 2015's Spectre, before Bond and Madeleine Swan exit London in the car at the film's conclusion. The DB5 enjoys a starring role in 2021's No Time to Die, where it has its biggest action sequence since the 1964 debut. Bond and Madeleine drive along the Italian coast in his DB5 with the number plate A428900. A short while later, the car takes to the streets of Matera and comes under attack. Bond guides the DB5 through the ancient city's winding streets, unloading a batch of cluster mini-mines from the car's rear. With assassins still clinging to their tail, Bond then powers the DB5 down a flight of steps before grazing it on a wall as he slips through a narrow alley. Just as he thinks he may have shaken their pursuers, an SUV smashes into the side, spinning the car into the middle of the piazza. Villains surround the car and pepper the DB5 with machine gun fire. Bond and Madeleine are protected by bulletproof panels and glass, and when it seems that the glass might shatter, Bond flicks a switch in the car's center console, which drops the front headlamps to reveal a brace of miniguns. He unleashes a hail of bullets while spinning the car in a 360-degree circle. As the enemy scatters, he then releases a smoke screen from the exhaust and makes a swift escape before ditching the car at a railway station. The vehicle. In his books, James Bond author Ian Fleming had placed his super agent behind the wheel of one of the last 4.0-liter Bentleys, a battleship gray coupe boasting a supercharger constructed by noted automotive engineer Amherst Villiers. The novel Goldfinger, however, introduced what Fleming called an Aston Martin DB3, which 007 borrows from MI6 Carpool because it was armed with a selection of extras, notably reinforced bumpers, a Colt 45 stashed beneath the driver's seat, a radio that could follow a tracking device, and machine that changed the type and color of the rear lights. These were cutting-edge technological innovations when the novel was published in 1959, prompting producers Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman to approach Aston Martin when taking their version of the Goldfinger story into movie production in 1963. After much negotiation, Aston Martin agreed to lend the production their new DB5. The car that made its way to Pinewood was the first prototype DB5, which was in fact a Series 5 DB4. This car had the chassis number DP/216/1, DP being the Aston Martin acronym for Development Project. This was finished in Debonair red and wore the iconic registration plate BMT 216A. The DB5 was, essentially, a 4.0-liter version of the Series 5 DB4. Indeed, the DB5 of 1964 was almost indistinguishable from its predecessor, cosmetically, bar a badge on the front wing, which was barely a criticism given the standards achieved by the last of the DB4s. When the production headed to the Alps, Aston agreed to lend a second car to the production, a properly finished DB5 featuring the ZF 5-speed gearbox, which carried the plate FMP7B. The two cars, once finished in the same silver birch paint job, were virtually identical, though BMT-21A was designated the Trick Aston Martin by Ian on the Goldfinger call sheets, featured indicator lights on each wing and an aerial behind the driver's side wing mirror, while FMP-7B, designated as the road car, sported a more rounded number plating housing. Aston Martin finished the DB5 at the 1963 Frankfurt Motor Show, and Classic Coupe was displayed at the Earl's Court Show on November 6th with an immersive marketing spiel that outlined its 4.0-liter engine developed by Tadek Matic, giving 282 bhp at 5,500 rpm. It featured the David Brown 4-speed gearbox, though the ZF 5-speed unit was said to be available. Under the bonnet modifications saw the DB5 become one of the first British cars to carry an alternator in place of the dynamo, while an oil cooler was fitted and there were now 4 silencers instead of 2. Magazine testing for the car recorded a top speed of 142.6 miles per hour with a 0 to 60 mile per hour time of 8.1 seconds. The production. When the production acquired the first car from Aston Martin for Goldfinger, James Bond production designer Ken Adam and special effects advisor John Stears set about adding gadgets to the vehicle. The modifications to the DB3, as outlined by Fleming in his novel, were cutting edge in 1959, but by 1963, the filmmakers decided were not spectacular enough for the James Bond cinema audience. Hence, Adam set about designing the extras that would propel 007's car to superstar status. Adam was a self-confessed sports car freak and had often dreamed of adding gadgets to his own vehicle. The Jaguar he drove in the early 60s, for example, was a regular recipient of bumps and dents courtesy of others' careless parking, and the ideas behind both the machine guns and extending overriders were born from his frustrations with other drivers. As the team sketched out their ideas, they chose to retain a number of Fleming's modifications, the reinforced bumpers evolving into the extending overriders. The tray for the 007's pistol was also retained, and several other weapons added, as also a radio tune to receive messages from a Homer tracking device. They then added modifications that would excite the imagination of cinemagoers, but which were also grounded in reality. Indeed, there were precedents of sorts for a number of the DB5's most famous modifications, notably the tire slasher, which owed a debt to the scythed chariots of ancient history and had gone on to feature in 1959's Ben-Hur. By mid-February 1964, after 6 weeks of mechanical labor, Stears and his team had transformed the factory-finished car by fitting an arsenal that would elevate the car to the status of a motoring icon. Its paint job was switched to the famous silver birch. The production fitted further modifications that were never used on screen. The revolving number of plates are demonstrated in Q's lab and were marked BMT 216A for the UK, 4711 EA62 for France, and LU 6789 for Switzerland, but were not used on Bond's Alpine road trip. These were arranged on a triangular pivot that fitted into a rectangular box attached to the front bumper. Stears and his team also built extending overriders into both the front and rear bumpers of the caltrop dispenser, which the special effects team tested successfully on the Pinewood backlot. The spikes were held inside a container hidden behind the driver's side rear light. The weapons omission from the film was prompted by concerns among the filmmakers that it might encourage immature or reckless motorists to drop red nails, real nails, on the road, which could have potentially lethal consequences. The second DB5 lent by Aston Martin, registered with the plate FMP7B, was used again in Thunderball. Amazingly, in April 1968, an official at Aston Martin gave the order for the original James Bond DB5, the tricked-out machine carrying the registration BMT 216A, to have its non-standard equipment removed and to be built as a standard car before being sold off. The buyer did reinstate the gadgets, albeit to a slightly different specification, before reselling the car again in 1970. After its decades-long absence, the DB5 reappeared in GoldenEye, the filmmakers shooting its mountain duel with the Ferrari F355 GTS near Thronic during late February and early March of 1995. At one point, the two cars collided, and while the DB5 was fixed on the spot, the Ferrari had to go to Monte Carlo for repairs. For the DB5's starring role in No Time to Die, the filmmakers used two classic DB5s, which have an identical finish. For the majority of the close-up shots with Bond and Madeline entering and exiting the car, the production used the Eon-owned vehicle that features in previous films, including Skyfall and Spectre. All the stunt work, meanwhile, was shot with 8 bespoke DB5 replicas, specifically built for the production by the engineers at Aston Martin. 2 of the 8 vehicles were built as gadget cars to house the smoke screen, the mine dispenser, and the machine guns. Of the remaining 6, 2 more were fitted with pods that allowed the stunt drivers to control the car while sitting on the roof. This ensured that the actors could be filmed inside the cars while it was driving at high speeds. The remaining 4 were built as standard models, which acted as the main vehicles seen on screen during the chase. GoldenEye 007 is a 1997 first-person shooter game developed by Rare and published by Nintendo for the Nintendo 64. It is based on the 1995 James Bond film GoldenEye, with the player controlling the secret agent James Bond to prevent a criminal syndicate from using a satellite weapon. They navigate a series of levels to complete objectives, such as recovering or destroying objects while shooting enemies. In a multiplayer mode, up to 4 players compete in several deathmatch scenarios via split screen. Development began in January of 1995. An inexperienced team led by Martin Hollis developed GoldenEye 007 over 2.5 years. The game was conceived initially as a rail shooter in the style of Sega's Virtua Cop from '94, later developing into a first-person shooter. Rare visited the GoldenEye set for reference, and Eon Productions and Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, or MGM, allowed them to expand the game with sequences and characters not featured in the film. GoldenEye 007 was released in August 1997, almost 2 years after the release of the film, but shortly before the release of its sequel, Tomorrow Never Dies. It faced low expectations from the gaming media during development. However, it received critical acclaim and sold over 8 million copies, making it the third best-selling Nintendo 64 game. The game was praised for its visuals, gameplay depth and variety, and multiplayer mode. In 1998, it received the BAFTA Interactive Entertainment Award, as well as 4 awards from the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences. GoldenEye 007 demonstrated the viability of home consoles as platforms for first-person shooters and signaled a transition from Doom-like shooters to a more grounded style. It pioneered features such as atmospheric single-player missions, widescreen gaming, stealth elements, and console multiplayer deathmatch. The game is considered to be one of the most influential and greatest video games ever made, with many of its elements, such as the cloud gun, leaving an enduring impression in video game culture. A spiritual successor, Perfect Dark, was released in 2000, while a remake developed by Eurocom, also entitled GoldenEye 007, was released in 2010. The original game was re-released in January 2023 on Xbox One and Xbox Series XS via the Xbox Game Pass and Nintendo Switch via Nintendo Classics service. Gameplay: GoldenEye 007 is a first-person shooter in which the player takes the role of Secret Intelligence Service agent James Bond through a series of levels. In each level, the player must complete a set of objectives while computer-controlled opponents try to hinder the player's progress. Objectives range from recovering items to destroying objects, defeating enemies, or rescuing hostages. Some objectives may require the player to use high-tech gadgets. For example, in one level, the player must use Bond's electromagnetic watch to acquire a jail cell key. Although the player begins each level with limited amounts of supplies, additional weapons and ammunition can be acquired from defeated enemies. There are no health recovery items, but body armor can be acquired to provide a secondary health bar. The game features more than 20 weapons, including pistols, submachine guns, assault rifles, a sniper rifle, grenades, and throwing knives. Most weapons have a finite magazine and must be reloaded after a certain number of shots. Although each weapon has its own characteristics, ammunition is interchangeable between some of the weapon types. For example, pistols and submachine guns can share ammunition. Weapons inflict different levels of damage depending on which body part they hit. Headshots cause the most damage, while arm and leg shots inflict the least amount of damage. The Klob, a submachine gun with a folding stock, possesses a high rate of fire and wide bullet spread compared to other weapons, but it is severely underpowered with heavy recoil. The Klob can be dual-wielded for additional firepower. Stealth is often encouraged, as frequent gunfire can alert distant guards and alarms can spawn enemies. Certain weapons incorporate a suppressor or telescopic sight to aid the player in killing enemies discreetly. Each level can be played on 3 difficulty settings: Agent, secret agent, and 00 agent. These affect aspects such as the damage enemies can withstand and inflict with the amount of ammunition available, and the number of objectives that must be completed. 2 bonus levels can be unlocked by completing the game on Special Agent and then on 00 Agent. The player may also replay previous completed levels within target times to unlock bonus cheat options, such as infinite ammunition or invincibility. Upon completing the game on the 3 difficulty settings, an additional mode is unlocked, allowing the player to customize the difficulty of a level by manually adjusting enemies' health, reaction times, aiming accuracy, and the damage they inflict. Plot: in 1986, in Arkhangelsk, Soviet Union, MI6 has uncovered a secret chemical weapons facility at the Belomorye Dam. James Bond and fellow 00 agent Alec Trevelyan are sent to infiltrate the facility and plant explosive charges. During the mission, Trevelyan is shot by General Arkady Aryamov, while Bond escapes by commandeering an aeroplane. 5 years later, in 1991, Bond is set to investigate a satellite control station in Savanyure, Russia, where programmer Boris Grushenko works. In 1993, Bond investigates an unscheduled test firing of a missile in Kyrgyzstan, believing to be a cover for the launch of a satellite known as GoldenEye. This space-based weapon works by firing a concentrated electromagnetic pulse, or EMP, at any Earth target to disable any electrical circuit within range. As Bond leaves the silo, he is ambushed by Aramov and a squad of Russian troops. Aramov manages to escape during the encounter. In 1995, Bond visits Monte Carlo to investigate the frigate Lafayette, where he rescues several hostages and plants a tracker bug on the pirate helicopter before it is stolen by the Janus crime syndicate. Bond is then sent a second time to Severnaya, but during the mission he is captured and locked up in the bunker's cells along with Natalia Simonova, a captive computer programmer unwilling to work with Janus. They both escape the complex seconds before it is destroyed, on the orders of Aramov, by the GoldenEye's satellite EMP. Bond next travels to St. Petersburg, where he arranges with ex-KGB agent Valentin Zukovsky to meet the chief of the Janus organization. This is revealed to be Alec... Oh my gosh, these names are killing me. Alec Trevelyan. His execution by Aramov in the Arkhangelsk facility was faked. Bond and Natalia escape from Trevelyan, but are arrested by the Russian police and are taken to the military archives for interrogation. Eventually, Bond escapes the interrogation room, rescues Natalia, and communicates with Defense Minister Dmitry Miskin, who has verified Bond's claim of Uramov's treachery. Natalia is recaptured by General Urumov, and Bond gives chase through the streets of St. Petersburg, eventually reaching an arms depot by Janus. There, Bond destroys its weaponry stores and then hitches a ride to Trevelyan's ex-Soviet missile train, where he kills Urumov and rescues Natalia. However, Alec Trevelyan and his ally Zina Onatop escape their secret base in Cuba. Natalia accompanies Bond to the Caribbean, surveying the Cuban jungle aerially. Their light aircraft is shot down. Unscathed, Bond and Natalia perform a ground search of the area's heavily guarded jungle terrain, but are ambushed by Xena, who is quickly killed by Bond. Bond sneaks Natalia into the control center to disrupt transmissions to the GoldenEye satellite, and force it to burn up in the Earth's atmosphere. He then follows the fleeing Trevelyan through a series of flooded caverns, eventually arriving at the antenna of the control center's radio telescope. Trevelyan attempts to realign it in the final attempt to restore contact with the GoldenEye, but Bond destroys the machinery vital to controlling the antenna and defeats Trevelyan in a gunfight on a platform above the dish. Development. Design. GoldenEye 007 was developed by the British studio Rare and directed by Martin Hollis, who had previously worked as a second programmer on the coin-op version of Killer Instinct. In November 1994, after Nintendo and Rare discussed the possibility of developing a game based on the upcoming James Bond film GoldenEye, Hollis told Tim Stamper, Rare's managing director, that he was interested in the project. Due to the success of Rare's 1994 game, Donkey Kong Country, GoldenEye 007 was originally suggested as a 2D platformer for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. However, Hollis proposed a 3D shooting game for the upcoming Nintendo 64 console. He created a document with design ideas, including gadgets, weapons, characters, story digression from the film, and artificial intelligence, or AI, that would react to the player. Rare named Sega's 1994 light gun shooter Virtua Cop, ID's Software's seminal 1993 first-person shooter Doom, and the Nintendo 64 launch game Super Mario 64 as influences. Features such as gun reloading, position-dependent hit reaction animations, penalties for killing innocent characters, and the aiming system that is activated with the R button of the Nintendo 64 controller were adopted from Virtua Cop. The developers considered having players reload weapons by unplugging and reinserting the rumble pack on the controller, but Nintendo opposed the idea. The concept of several varied objectives within each mission was inspired by the multiple tasks in each stage of Super Mario 64. The team visited the studios of the GoldenEye film several times to collect photographs and blueprints of the sets. Eon Productions and MGM, the companies that control the James Bond films, granted the team a broad license, and many levels were extended or modified to allow the player to participate in sequences not seen in the film. Although the reference material was used for authenticity, the team was not afraid to add to it to help the game design. John Woo films, such as Hard Boiled, influenced the visual effects and kinetic movements. Such details as bullet-marked walls, cartridge cases being ejected from the guns, and objects exploding were part of the design. Hollis wanted players to receive a lot of feedback from the environment when they shot. The team considered implementing both on-rails and free-roaming modes because they did not know how the Nintendo 64 controller would work, and the game's gas plant location was modeled with a predetermined path in mind. A modified Sega Saturn controller was used for some early play testing. The design's initial priority was purely on the creation of interesting spaces. Level design and balance considerations such as placement of start and exit points, characters, and objectives did not begin until this process was complete. According to Hollis, this unplanned approach gave many levels a realistic and non-linear feel, with several rooms having no direct relevance to a level. After completing the levels, the developers modeled around 40 James Bond gadgets that had been depicted in the films and attempted to to find uses for them in each level. Production. Work on GoldenEye 007 began in January of 1995 with a team hired by Hollis. Programmer Mark Edmonds, background artist Carl Hilton, and character artist B. Jones. Edmonds focused on creating a game engine that could render 3D graphics from art packages into Nintendo 64 data structures. Hilton modeled levels based on film material, while Jones constructed characters based on photos and costumes they had. Since final Nintendo 64 specifications and development kits were not initially available to Rare, the team had to estimate the finalized console's capabilities using a SGI Onyx workstation and Nintendo's custom Nin-Gen development software. In the following months, designer Duncan Botwood joined the team to construct the levels. The first year was spent producing art assets and developing the engine, which originally only allowed the player and enemies to move around in a virtual environment. After the first year of development, Rare added more staff to the project. The first addition was designer David Doak, who helped with the level designs and worked on AI scripting. He explained how the stealth elements were implemented. Whenever you fire a gun, it has a radius test and alerted the non-player characters within that radius. If you fired the same gun again with a certain amount of time, it did a larger radius test, and I think there was a third, even larger radius after that. It meant that if you found one guy and shot him in the head, and then didn't fire again, the timer would reset. Windows throughout the game were programmed so that enemies could not see through them. Though unrealistic, this encouraged the player to use windows to spy on enemies. Hollis hired a second programmer, Steve Ellis, 6 months later. Although Ellis assisted the development team in many areas and programmed the cheat options, he was mostly responsible for implementing the multiplayer mode, which was added roughly 6 months before release. According to Doak, Ellis sat in a room with all the code written for a single-player game and turned GoldenEye into a multiplayer game. The team spent numerous late evenings playtesting it. The multiplayer levels were based on a single-player missions, and some of them do not support 4 players because they were initially not designed to handle multiplayer action. A firing range was modeled as an environment, but not added. Because the team assumed they could use anything from James Bond universe, the multiplayer mode features characters that appear in previous Bond films. Actors who portrayed Bond in previous films were playable during development, but were removed because Rare was unable to get Sean Connery's permission to use his likeness. Despite their fictional names, most weapons were modeled after real-world firearms such as the Walther PPK, the AK-74, and the FNP-90. The Club was inspired by the Scorpion, a Czechoslovakian machine gun with a folding stock. Its name was chosen to honor Ken Lobb, who was Rare's Nintendo side producer and contact at the time. Another weapon, the DD44, Doskiev, modeled after the Tokarev pistol, was named after Doak's initials. Adrian Smith, the game's third and last artist, who had already worked on some of Rare's games, was in charge of producing visual effects such as muzzle flashes and explosions. He mentioned the '95 film Heat as an influence. The final Nintendo 64 hardware could render polygons faster than the SGI Onyx workstation the development team had been using. This helped the developers significantly, as some of the backgrounds rendered at 2 frames per second on the Onyx without even drawing enemies, objects, or Bond's gun. However, the textures had to be cut down by half. Hilton explained one method of improving performance. A lot of GoldenEye is in black and white. RGB color textures cost a lot more in terms of processing power. You could do double the resolution if you used grayscale, so a lot was done like that. If you needed a bit of color, I'd add it in the vertex. When Super Mario 64 was released in 1996, the 3D collision detection system was influential for Hollis because GoldenEye 007 was originally using a 2D method. The music was primarily composed by Graeme Norgate and Grant Kirkhope. Norgate previously penned the music of Blast Corps, while Kirkhope composed the music of Donkey Kong Land 2. Robin Beanland, the game's third composer, only wrote the elevator music that can be heard in certain levels. All sound effects were created by Norgate, and a lot of effort was put into combining and permuting sounds in different ways to create satisfying feels. According to Hollis, whenever the player shoots a gun, up to 9 different sound effects will randomly trigger. When the game was reviewed by Nintendo shortly before it was released, the company was slightly concerned about the amount of violence and gunplay. As a result, the team toned down the killing and added an end credits sequence that introduces all the non-player characters, giving the game a filmic sense. The game received a teen rating from the Entertainment Software Rating Board. GoldenEye 007 was released on a 96 megabit cartridge on the 25th of August 1997. Although this was over a year and a half after the release of the GoldenEye film, the game benefited from publicity for the upcoming James Bond film Tomorrow Never Dies. Every cartridge of the game contains a ZX Spectrum emulator with 10 rare developed games. This function was originally made as an experimental side project by Rare and was deactivated in the final version, but has since been unlocked through fan-made patches. The development of GoldenEye 007 took more than 2.5 years to complete and had a budget of $2 million. Reception. Despite low expectations among the gaming media and an unsuccessful showing at the Electronic Entertainment Expo in Atlanta in '97, GoldenEye 007 received widespread acclaim from critics and was a commercial success. In 1998, it sold approximately 2.1 million copies. By 2001, it had sold over 7 million copies worldwide. Overall, GoldenEye 007 sold more than 8 million units worldwide, making it the third best-selling Nintendo 64 game, behind Super Mario 64 and Mario Kart 64. According to a paper published on the website of Entertainment Software Association, the game grossed $250 million worldwide, more than 70% of the movie's box office, despite having only 3.3% of the movie's budget. Legacy. GoldenEye 007 has been credited for proving that it is possible to create a fun first-person shooter experience on a home console in both single-player and multiplayer modes. When the game was released, the first-person shooter genre was primarily for PC games. The game opened the genre to the console market, and it has been credited for paving the way for the popularity of Halo and Call of Duty. The game's introduction of multiplayer deathmatch mode on console is often credited for having revolutionized the genre, with Edge stating that it had set the standard for the multiplayer console combat until it was surpassed by Halo Combat Evolved in 2001. GoldenEye 007 also introduced stealth elements that were unprecedented in first-person shooters. The game's use of realistic gameplay, which contrasted with the approaches taken by Doom clones, and its context-sensitive hit locations on enemies, added a realism that was previously unseen in video games. Although the 1996 Team Fortress computer mod for Quake had previously introduced headshots. Alongside Shiny Entertainment's 1997 third-person shooter MDK, GoldenEye 007 has been credited with pioneering and popularizing the now standard inclusion of scoped sniper rifles in video games. The game's mission design, enemy AI, and stealth gameplay influenced contemporary titles such as Half-Life, Thief: The Dark Project, Siphon Filter, and Deus Ex. LEGO did have a larger creator, Aston Martin DB5, but it had retired by the time I got back into building Legos. Even though the Aston Martin is featured in the GoldenEye film, there weren't any levels for driving the car in the game of the same name. There is a 007 racing game and a few games that have the vehicle more present, but I felt that the GoldenEye 007 game was a better representation of the 007 franchise as a whole. Something iconic. Total build time today, 1 hour, 5 minutes, 25 seconds. You could watch roughly half of the first film that featured the Aston Martin, Goldfinger from 1964, at 110 minutes. Let me know what you think in the comments section below. Remember to like, subscribe, share, ring that bell, all the things for the YouTubes. Thank you.